In July 2000, Air France's Concorde was due to make its regular transatlantic crossing when disaster struck. The Concorde, known for its iconic design and recognition, had an untarnished safety record up to that point. It was designed by both French and British engineers, a joint project that began in 1962. The project was expected to cost £70 million. However, the project's costs exceeded expectations and reached around £1.32 billion. But the spending seemed worth it. The Concorde was capable of cutting hours off transatlantic flights. Normally, a flight from London to New York would take around 8 hours, but Concorde could complete it in 3.5 hours. The 4 engines were equipped with reheat technology, also known as afterburners, to propel the aircraft to supersonic speeds. Its delta wings were shaped like a triangle, and its nose was tipped downwards to increase landing visibility. The turbojets propelled Concorde through the sound barrier, allowing it to cruise at Mach 2.04, more than twice the speed of sound. The reheating capabilities provided increased thrust and enabled the aircraft to reach and maintain supersonic velocities, making it one of the fastest commercial airplanes in history. The Concorde had a takeoff speed of approximately 250 miles per hour and cruised at an altitude of 60,000 feet, which is almost double the altitude of regular commercial airliners. This high altitude allowed the Concorde to maintain its cruising speed of 1,350 miles per hour, which was more than twice the speed of sound. In comparison, a Boeing 747 cruises at around 614 miles per hour, and the Airbus A380 at around 737 miles per hour. Due to the heat generated by traveling at such high speeds, the Concorde's airframe stretched between 6 and 10 inches mid-flight. The aircraft was also coated in a special paint to manage the challenging conditions of supersonic travel. Concorde was considered luxurious and accessible only to wealthy travelers. With its narrow fuselage, it accommodated passengers in a 4-abreast seating arrangement, offering a more personalized experience. The seating configuration allowed for 40 passengers in the forecabin and 60 in the rear, totaling 100 passengers. Throughout its operational lifetime, Concorde completed nearly 50,000 flights and served over 2.5 million passengers. The limited number of passengers and its unique features made flying on Concorde an exclusive and iconic experience. During its operational period, only Air France and British Airways operated the Concorde aircraft. Its first successful flight was in 1969, followed by its first commercial flight in 1976. However, despite nearly 3 decades of successful operation, the Concorde's unblemished record came to an end. It was a disaster that had perhaps been brewing for some time, but it was surprising given the rigorous testing it endured. Before Concorde was certified for commercial use, it underwent extensive testing amounting to 5,000 test hours, making it one of the most rigorously tested aircraft. Around 250 engineers were involved in monitoring and assessing the aircraft's performance. Despite these efforts, flaws in the wheel design led to multiple incidents, the last of which had fatal consequences. The testing process is crucial to ensure an aircraft's safety and performance before entering commercial service. In June 1979, a Concorde aircraft experienced a tire blowout during takeoff from Washington Dulles International Airport. The blowout resulted in severe damage, including the puncture of 3 fuel tanks, damage to an engine, severed hydraulic lines and electrical wires, and a hole blown in one of the wings. The impact caused significant rattling and shaking inside the aircraft, with passengers likening the experience to driving over speed bumps at high speed. The incident highlighted the potential dangers of tire blowouts during takeoff and its cascading effects on the aircraft's systems. This was a terrifying experience for both passengers and crew on board. The aircraft had been delayed by a few hours from its previous trip due to a fault related to the hydraulic line, although investigators later claimed that this hydraulic issue was not linked to the tire blowout incident that occurred at Washington Dulles International Airport. Thankfully, Air France captain Jean Doublé was able to avert disaster. As he took off, he was made aware of the situation. The plane was leaking fuel fast. 2 left side wheels had blown, all rubber was missing. The rims had been sheared off and they were down to the hubs. Captain Doublé flew over the control tower to confirm the damage. He considered flying to New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, but realizing the full extent of the damage, made the decision to return to the runway at Dulles. He insisted on the longest runway possible as he knew the brakes were likely to have failed. He was guided to runway 19. As he came in to land, he tilted the plane to the right so that the right-hand wheels touched the tarmac first. This took the pressure off the damaged left side. He then eased the aircraft gently onto the left wheels. As suspected, part of the braking system was out, so he relied on reverse thrust to bring the aircraft to a stop. No one was injured in the incident, and all 81 passengers and 9 crew exited the plane safely. During the 20 minutes that the airplane was airborne, it shed 40 tons of the 94 tons of fuel it was carrying. The pilot was praised for his calm demeanor under pressure. If the 2 damaged wheels had given way when landing, then the wing could have scraped the runway, igniting the damaged fuel tanks and ending in disaster. It had been a close call. "The pilot did one heck of a job," said Dulles Airport Operations Officer Patrick T. Chitwood, who watched the landing from the field. That wasn't the only non-fatal incident to happen to Concorde in its lifetime. In the following 2 years, Air France Concorde suffered a further 3 tire blowouts, and British Airways were suffering from similar issues with their tires too. One such incident occurred as Concorde was returning to London Heathrow from John F. Kennedy International Airport. The pilot successfully executed a landing and employed reverse thrust for deceleration. However, upon applying the wheel brakes, a sudden bang was heard, and a cockpit warning light illuminated, signaling a malfunction in the wheel brake system. This incident involved another tire blowout, with debris piercing an engine and a fuel tank. Fortunately, the tank was empty. Otherwise, the outcome could have been drastically different for those on board. A few months later, a similar incident occurred, so British Airways had made significant modifications to the wheel structure. They applied a protective arch over the wheel to protect the aircraft from debris in the event of a blowout. Air France, on the other hand, made no structural changes and instead focused on improving pre-flight inspections specifically related to the wheels. On the afternoon of July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 was due to take off at Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. Its destination was New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. It was a route it had flown hundreds of times before. The aircraft had accumulated nearly 12,000 flight hours and undergone around 5,000 takeoff and landing cycles over its 25-year lifespan. On board the Concorde were 100 passengers, including many German tourists. These passengers were on their way to the cruise ship MS Deutschland, which was docked in New York. The cruise ship was scheduled for a 16-day voyage to Manta, Ecuador. Just 4 days prior to that fateful day, the aircraft had a scheduled inspection and repair. Nothing unusual or concerning was picked up during the service, but unbeknown to the crew or to air traffic control, a Continental Airlines flight bound for Newark International Airport had shed some debris upon takeoff 5 minutes earlier. It was a titanium alloy strip that was part of the engine's cover. Its loss posed no threat to the Continental Airlines flight. However, lying on the tarmac at 17 inches long and an inch wide, it was small enough to go unnoticed, but large enough to cause catastrophic damage. The crew in the cockpit of the Air France flight consisted of 3 highly experienced individuals. The pilot, Captain Christian Marty, had been with Air France for more than 30 years. He had more than 13,000 flight hours, 317 of them on Concorde. Alongside him was First Officer Jean Marceau, who had 10,000 flight hours, with over 2,500 of them on Concorde. And lastly, Gilles Jardinot was the flight engineer who had 12,500 flight hours, with over 900 of them being on Concorde. These experienced professionals contributed to the airline's operational expertise and safety measures. The departure was delayed by almost an hour because the crew was requested to replace the pneumatic motor of the jet reverser of engine number 2. Besides, the rear bogie of the left main undercarriage was renewed. After all 100 passengers had boarded, the aircraft taxied to runway 26R, which had a length of 4,217 meters. The takeoff weight was calculated at 186.9 tons, including 95 tons of fuel. Officially, this was 1 ton above the maximum allowable takeoff weight. Exactly at 2:42 p.m., the crew received takeoff clearance, and under the direction of Concorde pilot Captain Marty, the plane started its way into the air. The flight engineer urgently called for Captain Marty to abort takeoff, but the aircraft had already reached decision speed, the critical velocity at which takeoff must proceed to prevent the risk of runway overrun. The pilots faced limited options as they were unable to climb higher than 200 feet. Attempting to abort takeoff at that point would have been challenging due to the aircraft's high speed and limited runway remaining. The situation was compounded by tire debris that flew into the number 2 fuel tank. Although the fuel tank was not physically punctured, the impact of high-speed rubber debris flying into the tank caused the tank to rupture from the inside. The chilling photo of flames shooting out the back of the aircraft and underneath its wings was captured during those first terrifying moments. The tire fragments were also catapulted into the underside of the wing, damaging landing gear and preventing it from retracting. Air traffic controller Gilles Langelon immediately called the pilot. The harrowing transcript has since been published. "Concorde 4590, you have flames. You have flames behind you." As the fuel ignited and the fire engulfed the plane, engines 1 and 2 lost thrust. The chief navigator can be heard saying, "Break down engine 2, cut engine 2. In the seconds that followed, the pilot made the decision to try to gain altitude to make an emergency landing at Le Bourget Airport, just 10 miles away. He grappled with the controls. The drag caused by the extended landing gear, the loss of thrust from the failed engines, and the fire damage made controlling the aircraft impossible. "Too late," he said. "No time." Those were his final words. But his co-pilot pressed forwards, trying to make contact with the airport. "Le Bourget, Le Bourget, negative, we are trying Le Bourget," he said over the radio. 16 seconds later, the radio transmission was cut, and the plane plummeted from the sky. It crashed into a small hotel and restaurant in the suburb of Gonesse. It had traveled only 3 miles from the runway. It hit the ground just 77 seconds after takeoff and exploded on impact. All 100 passengers and 9 crew lost their lives in the disaster. In addition, 4 people staying at Hotel Relais Bleu also lost their lives, and 6 more were seriously injured. The crash of Air France Flight 4590 was a tragic accident that, in hindsight, could have been avoided. Following the crash, investigators found numerous flaws which could have contributed to the fatalities. Firstly, the metal strip that had caused Concorde's tire to rupture had been replaced on the Continental Airlines aircraft not only once, but twice in the previous month. The strip that was replaced the second time wasn't done so in accordance with the manufacturer's guidelines. Upon inspection, the Concorde aircraft was found to be overloaded by 810 kilograms, which exceeded its maximum safe takeoff weight. This excess weight, initially deemed insignificant, was later discovered to have likely contributed to the catastrophic disaster. The aircraft carried additional fuel beyond its standard volume, and 19 items of luggage or last-minute additions not accounted for in the flight's manifest. The weight distribution was skewed towards the rear of the plane. Furthermore, a change in wind direction occurred just prior to takeoff. However, instead of taxiing to the opposite end of the runway, the flight took off with an 8-knot tailwind. All of these factors, including an increase in backward weight distribution due to factors such as extra fuel and baggage, contributed to pushing Concorde's center of gravity backward. When the forward fuel tank became damaged and started leaking fuel, the center of gravity was moved even further to the back. This combination of factors pushed the aircraft's center of gravity beyond the safe operational limit as calculated by Concorde's test pilots. The aircraft's landing gear failed to retract after takeoff due to a loose part of the landing gear. Investigation revealed that a missing spacer on one of the beams caused the landing gear to wobble slightly. The uneven weight distribution of the fuel tanks exacerbated the problem. Investigators determined that had these factors not been in play, the plane might have taken off earlier and not come into contact with the metal strip that ultimately caused the catastrophic events. Just as the plane was about to take off, it was flying down the runway at 188 knots, 11 knots slower than the recommended speed. Normally, when an engine begins to falter or leak fuel, the procedure is to reach a stable flying altitude of about 400 feet before shutting down. However, in this case, flight engineer Gilles Jardinot shut down engine 2 far too early at only 25 feet without the captain's permission. This action was a premature engine shutdown and deviated from standard operating procedures. Mistakes were made, there is no doubt about it, but it took only 2 minutes from running over the metal strip to crashing into the hotel. There was very little time to gauge the severity of the damage and react to it before the plane plummeted downwards. There was no contingency plan for the failure of 2 engines on the runway, as that was deemed a near impossible scenario. Immediately following the crash, Air France grounded all of its Concordes. British Airways followed suit a couple of weeks later. So who was to blame for the incident that claimed the lives of 113 individuals? At the time of the crash, Concorde was considered one of the safest airliners in the world. The crash of Air France Flight 4590 was its only fatal accident in its 31-year history, a record no other commercial aircraft had matched before. The tragedy prompted questions and a need for accountability, especially from the families who had lost loved ones on the flight. They needed someone to be held accountable for their loss. It took years of criminal investigations to bring those responsible to account. In 2008, 8 years after the crash, manslaughter charges were brought against 2 employees of Continental Airlines. It was alleged that they didn't use an approved replacement strip and the repair was not carried out in the recommended way. Instead, Taylor had used a metal strip of a metal alloy containing 90% titanium, not stainless steel, which was specified by the engine manufacturer. The trial ran in a Parisian court in 2010, and Continental Airlines fought the charges. They claimed that eyewitnesses saw the plane was already on fire before it ran over the metal strip, almost as soon as it began to accelerate down the runway. But John Taylor and Stanley Ford weren't the only ones being prosecuted. The airline was ordered to pay 1 million euros to Air France and was fined 200,000 euros. However, this was just a drop in the bucket, as Air France had already paid 100 million euros in damages to the victims' families. Continental Airlines was ordered to pay 70% of the compensation claims. 2 years after their initial convictions, the mechanic John Taylor and Continental Airlines had their verdicts overturned by a French appeals court. They were found not criminally responsible for their roles in the Concorde crash. The court's decision overturned their previous convictions, highlighting that they were not held legally accountable for the disaster. But the Air France crash marked a major turning point for Concorde. The incident had a major impact on people's willingness to fly the supersonic jet again. Despite Concorde's reputation as a reliable aircraft, the crash raised doubts about its safety. Moreover, Concorde was already an expensive means of transportation, and the crash further tarnished its image and reputation. Following the tragic events of 9/11, the airline industry experienced a significant decline in air travel as people became more cautious in their transportation choices and more reluctant to fly. The decline in passengers did not cover the rising costs required to maintain the Concorde fleet. It was with pain in the heart that the decision was made to retire the iconic aircraft.
The New York fire tenders spraying the Air France Concorde as it taxied out for the last flight home.
And so it was that on October 24, 2003, Captain Mike Bannister flew Concorde on its last commercial flight from New York JFK to London Heathrow. Throughout its lifetime, Concorde made many records, primarily related to its speed. One of its notable achievements was completing the fastest transatlantic crossing from New York to London in just 2 hours, 52 minutes, and 59 seconds. Additionally, Concorde held symbolic significance for both the French and British nations, serving as a source of national pride. The aircraft participated in various commemorative and celebratory events, showcasing its iconic status. Some of the original Concorde fleet can still be seen on display in different parts of the world, serving as a reminder of its technological and cultural impact. Other supersonic aircraft had also been built, such as the Soviet Union's Tupolev Tu-144N, which bore a striking resemblance to the Concorde. The Tu-144 made its maiden flight on December 31, 1968, but had several challenges and flaws. It had a shorter range, poor control at low speeds, and required brake parachutes to assist in stopping. The Tu-144 had a shorter operational life and was retired after only 55 flights, making it an unsuccessful airliner. Although others have tried to build supersonic aircraft similar to Concorde, it seems that the French and British design and success of Concorde have yet to be matched. Thanks for watching this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on your notification bell to stay updated on more similar videos. We would love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share your comments below. Until next time.